Okay. All right, I'm Don Weiss, and there, the cameraman is Jeff Taylor. So, I begin with a question. Jeff had asked me about what this was. What is this? And what are we doing today? Okay? Let me put it this way. He asked, for example, is it a run-through of the course that I'll be teaching at Johns Hopkins, the Osher program, starting a week from today? But what is it that I want to do for an introduction is the next logical question. What's my idea of an introduction? It's a luxury because, after all, in the old days, the introduction to a course would be on the first day of the course. So now I get the luxury of what you might call an introduction to the introduction, which is what it is. But if I have this luxury, if these modern media allow us to do this kind of thing, and Jeff and I are scratching our heads and trying to wonder about what we can do in that realm, then the question, it seems to me, becomes very, very simple for me as a challenge to a first introduction to an introduction. But surely, to get back to the trunk of what I was saying, there must be a way, says the objector, for you to give me a general idea of what it's all about, in a sense that it's not just a teaser, but something that has a payoff, where you actually understand what the system, and it is a system. In fact, the notion of system is very important, and we'll have to use the word system frequently, because it turns out that reality is systems upon systems upon systems, until you get to very intelligent creatures like us. And that deserves its own very special study as well. So, the force of all this is to force me to produce, in a very first session, something that could actually qualify or satisfy the description, this is the gist of Kabbalah. Now, you put yourself out on a limb whenever you say this is the gist of everything, and everybody, we all know, has his or her own gist. That's wonderful. We're all a microcosm, and everybody has his or her own story to tell, and that's true of philosophers as well. First of all, I was saying each person has his own take on it, but here what I mean is this, that I'm going to give you a certain extraction that I have, and it is one that goes in a certain direction. It takes Kabbalah so seriously that it wants to say, what is the truth of this? And how can this inform our basic philosophy and our basic science? So I'm coming at it from that particular angle, and later on I can go into the reasons that lie behind my own particular perspective and specialization onto it. As an introduction, this is my take. This is where I've gotten in life when it comes to the essence or the gist of Kabbalah, or Kabbalah. The first thing I would want to say, and Jeff is very good at putting these diagrams on and so forth, so just about now he's going to be loading onto the camera. He's only finding this out right now. Yin-yang. Nice picture of the yin and the yang. And make sure it's the one that has those nice little seeds in them, that the one side contains the seed of the other, because of course that's of the essence of the story. Why do I bring this up? One of the easiest ways to break into the subject of Kabbalah is to understand that it belongs to a family of philosophies. Let's call them philosophies for the moment. Some of which we're already familiar with, so that all I have to do is call attention to their basic structure, and you can say, oh, Kabbalah belongs to that family. I now can get a preliminary take on things. What family is that? But I want to use the word, if you can mount a word on graphically, the word is dialogos. dialogos, as one word, as in the word dialogue, but we also have the word dialectic. It's rooted in, it's a metaphysical, a basic view of the world, which is rooted in a certain very specific metaphor or model. Everything, we can talk about this, everything to the depths of science. Scientists themselves are always saying, think of it according to a certain model. And what's your basic modeling here? And when we first did electricity a century and a half ago, when they were first starting to do electrical technology very, very well, they built it on the model of plumbing. The resistances of pipes, the drop became the voltage involved, and the flow of water through the pipe, that became called actual electrical current. And building upon the hydraulic model of water flowing through pipes, you got the basic way in which we thought about electricity, and it worked. And of course you neglect the places where it doesn't work. It's just a model. But it is a model and a good one. Excuse me, what is the model here? Dialogos, dialogue, conversation. It's got a spooky outcome. It means that reality is not what we ordinarily, at least in our time, take it to be. Reality is quite spooky. Why? Because the fundamental reality is dialogue, conversation, talk. What's interesting about this? Well, the idea actually, again, it's a metaphysical idea. It's the idea that everything that you look at is not just equal to what it is. That sounds like, the kind of loose talk that a philosopher or somebody who wants to create a spooky effect might want to say. Well, so it is, but reality is spooky. And Jeff and I talk at length, and you can plug into some of these discussions because we'll have some of them on here about quantum mechanics and all of modern science, which seems to have spooky elements in it. It's interesting that the outcome of 20th century, now into the 21st century science, has been that reality is far, far spookier than the mechanical philosophy and science that prevailed until the late 19th century, whatever have had you believe. It was just beginning at 1900. That's when Planck discovered that famous characteristic of matter, and Einstein just around the same time with two different studies, that they started to realize that reality wasn't quite behaving the way it was supposed to, that is, according to old-fashioned mechanical science standards. That things were not simple machines. And it seemed more and more as the century passed, and now we're into the 20th century. By late 20th century, you have the phenomenon, we've been discussing this in a literary point of view, in terms of the influence on our own lives, books like the Tao of Physics, which is just exemplary of a whole slew of books that came out, all of which were trying to convince you that the world is strange, eerie, weird, that things are not only what they are more than that. Because to be the specific thing that it is means that it is always already entangled in relationships with others. There's no way that you can get, it's important, if I could just do a moment on Newton, you can't make Newtonian science work unless you can have a characterization of the individual parts of the system. Then you say, here are the laws that govern the interaction of these parts, and then you get your resultants. It works pretty well for the solar system, by the way, which is why Newton is so good. But there was always a problem of internal relations, and unsolvable problems in gravitation having to do with the fact that the gravitational effect multiplies. You can never get the individual mass of something because the mass of something is always already something which is being determined by the mass of the bodies in its environment. And so you have this maze of considerations. Even in the simplest systems, but most especially clearly in the most advanced systems, the intelligent systems, we learn about the essential twofoldness That's going to be a big word for me anyway, twofoldness of things. A thing is what it is. That is to say, whatever state description, whatever way in which you could try to describe how I actually am in the spatio-temporal world right now. That however you do that, that's not all that I am. What I am is at the same time one who is enmeshed in interrelation with, well, with who? This gets us to another important concept. And of course, the answer here is very simple. With those who are my proper dialogical partners. It happens that there are many different levels of this. The cells of the body have different dialogical partners. They have each other. And it works on a biological level. We'll get to that also. This is an important aspect of the thing. But you can see it right away. And by the way, if I could use this excursus into biology, because there's something very spooky about biology, very, very simple. Why is it that each cell contains the entire genome of that individual? All 46 chromosomes, with all the particular locations of all the genes and their interreactions, everything in place, so that, in principle, now we know you could clone my twin from a cheek cell or whatever. Yeah, you could clone a twin of Don Weiss, much younger than me, but that's spooky indeed. But what's really spooky about it is the fact that each cell does contain the map of the whole territory. It contains the blueprint of the entire organism. What's up with that? Why is it that the characterization of the individual cell includes a screen which involves this genome? The only suggestion that I think makes any sense, and in communication theory and in other places you start to get confirmation of this, I believe, is that you have to start regarding the organism as something which is an actual conversation. Now yes, of course, I said information theory because the communication here is not human linguistic communication. That has its own particular characteristics and makes us the very special thing we are when we get to that level. Even so, all the way down and all the way up, things are always constituted in this way. On the biological level, which is the next level down from what we call the cultural or linguistic, the human, specifically human, because of course when I get down to the biological, I'm talking about things that I share with any good animal, for example, but plants as well, organic life. But even in this context, or especially in this context when we realize how exquisite living organisms are, we see that their adaptiveness, their ability to cope and to survive is based in some sense, and we have to own that this is an implication of the whole worldview we're talking about, their intelligence. Things are smart. And with the word smart, cashes out. You could say it vaguely, but here what I'm trying to do is put it somewhat concretely according to the model, a real model of communication. And it says again, take the communication model as foundational. And yes, let it drive all of your thinking. Human, biological, right down to what we call the physical, meaning whatever it is that physics studies exactly. But we know that physics studies such things as atoms and the nuclei of those atoms. And all the interesting stuff that it's come up with there, yes, even there, it's important to see, and this is where we get to the quantum mechanics side of it. We're not there quite yet, although there are biological effects of quantum phenomena, but when we get to the quantum phenomena themselves, we're already down on the level of the atom. On that level too, what do you find? You find exquisite systems of systems. And things don't behave in the way that Newton, that good old-fashioned mechanical theory, would have you believe. It's as if there is a mutual attunedness of the parts of the system to one another as an integrated system. A truly integrated system, again, think now of the cell of the body as our second exemplar, but go back then to our first exemplar, which is actual human communication. This is important, because if you say, okay, maybe this is promising, and at first all you're doing is talking about a hypothesis. Suppose it's a promising hypothesis that we should look at things this way. And that's all you ever get in science, is hypotheses. Some of them turn out well and some of them don't. And when they don't, you can console yourself that negative results are relevant anyway. That's always the consolation that the graduate advisor gives to the student whose experiment didn't work out the way he had hoped. We can always console ourselves that negative information, well, it's not this. It saves somebody else the trouble of going there. You know? All you have in science is hypotheses, is what I'm saying. So, I'm trying to frame a hypothesis. The gist that I'm talking about, and giving you a gist of Kabbalah, involves a hypothesis formation based upon the model of communication. And I was about to say, if you accept this as our hypothetical model and say, what happens if we run with it? Develop it. It's been handed down to us. Kabbalah, what I call Kabbalah, is a big part of this tradition, this thing that has been received. What has been received is the rough meaning of Kabbalah. And if it were not promising in a very hip, modern sense, I would not be interested. I'm only interested, you could probably tell this by now, by my admiration for science, I'm only interested if it's going to make for good science. All right, the whole point now becomes this. If you're going to talk about dialogue, you're talking about something which is inherently evolutionary. And if you're claiming that dialogue is the model of all systems from bottom to top, then you're claiming that evolution is of the essence. So there is a form of religiosity about Kabbalah, but make no mistake, it is not only friendly toward evolution, the very mode of thinking absolutely requires it. For the dialectician or dialogician, however we call the person who believes in this dialogos model, we have to follow through on the very notion of what a conversation is. A conversation involves the mutual development of both partners. Let's start with a dualistic or binary model. Of course, we know that conversations are more complicated than that in real life. But in philosophical presentation of the material, you begin with the simplest plurality if you're going to understand the model. It's just an understanding of the model. And to do that, you can start with the simplest hypothesis of all. Imagine two people, just two, in this exemplary model kind of conversations involved. The point is that when people talk to each other, two things are involved on both sides. One, each is attempting to influence the other. Secondly, each is always being influenced by the other. Both of these things simultaneously are going on. That means, if I'm in this means, again, let me clarify now. You could say, well, I've been involved in lots of conversations that weren't like that. They were pretty stupid conversations. Let's clarify this. Yes, when we say, let's look at the model, it's as if you could say, to the guy who was trying to do electricity on the basis of the hydraulic model, if you said, I know a lot of pipes that are cloggier than that, you'd say, that's silly. I'm thinking of an idealized plumbing system as my model. Yeah, you're thinking of a good example. If I gave you an example of a robin redbreast, an ordinary bird, if I wanted to indicate to you what it was like, I'd go to Audubon and I'd get a very classical picture of a robin. You want to have the classical picture of what the thing is. And in biology, of course, all biologists, Jeff is a biologist, can tell you that anybody who's interested in species is always going to be interested in the type, an exemplary individual even. This is a type of the mushroom Amanita muscaria. And we work from the perfect example, and then we recognize, of course, that there are examples in the real world which aren't like that at all and are deficient in many respects. But we're trying to get at the sense of something that says, but leave aside the deficiencies in a possible system. How does it work when it does work? How does the plumbing work when it's working the way it's supposed to? Well then, back to our model of conversation, how does that work when it works the way it's supposed to? So now the word good really is unavoidable. It's unavoidable in good science. There you are. I just used it in a conversation about good science. What is a good instance of this model of yours? And now I get back to my point that of this mutual influence. And we all feel this if we just examine our day-to-day interactions with people. We certainly notice it because, in fact, in the real world, meaningful conversations are rare. Rare enough, anyway, that when you have one, you walk away with a peculiar satisfaction of having had a good conversation. By that I mean we use language, the English language, in various ways. We bump into somebody, we say, excuse me, we really mean it. We're being polite, and we mean to be polite. But no real thought is going on, no real exchange of anything that changes the people involved. They just have a way of being nice to each other and getting on with their day. And very often that's all we do. We chatter. A lot of what we say to each other is a repetition of the chatter that we heard on some ridiculous website. You do have to examine the question now, because we are led straight into the question, and it's a complex question. It's a many hundreds of pages question, actually, if you're a good philosopher and want to give good philosophical attention to its intricacies. You're into a conversation about what is a good conversation about. We're in a conversation about what a good conversation is about. I'm trying to figure that out. And there is an important conversation here. You have to pause and think about it. You could even work workshop style in it. But if you say, let's access and utilize the notion of a bad conversation for a moment, it could be useful. Don't just throw it away. Ask yourself the question, what was it about what you threw away that made you throw it away? Why wasn't it good? By looking at what wasn't good about it, you'll start to understand more about your selection process. I think one of the things you can start with when you just analyze intuitively and begin with an intuitive attempt to analyze day-to-day good conversation is that we label things good conversations when in fact you have a productive process of growth